Well, welcome, my friends, to another Common Communion. I'm your host, Jonathan Brandenburg, and I get to be the pastor at Christ Lutheran Church and School in beautiful Ranchos Palos Verdes. I almost messed that up, guys. I've only lived here a couple of months, so Ranchos Palos Verdes. We're going to get that right on target one of these days. It's good to be with you guys. And today we're going to go into this whole last section of Hebrews. We've been looking at Hebrews 11, 12, and 13. And today we end up with Hebrews 13. And it's actually very simple. In many ways, it's very straightforward because Hebrews 13 is a culmination of this journey that we've been on with Hebrews 11, 12, and 13. Which is basically summarized usually with just this simplistic line of a journey of faith. And yet, the journey of faith is anything but simple, as anybody who's ever been on a journey of faith knows that the journey of faith is complex, and the journey of faith is twisty and twiny, and never quite what we fully think it is. Sometimes it is, but most times it isn't. And so we started a few weeks ago just to wrap up a few things with the journey of hope. That all journeys of faith start with hope. Hope that there's something better. Hope that something could actually change. In sort of a hopeless, hard, and somewhat sarcastic, cynical world, when we don't really believe things change all that much, we get hope. It's a gift that invites us into this journey of faith. And it's not a idealistic hope necessarily. It's not a hope that's naive in many ways. It's a hope that actually looks at all the hopelessness in the face and say, I still have hope because of the gift that's been given to me. Not something that I see inside of myself or I see inside of others. No, it's hope that is hard to explain, but it's there and it doesn't put us to shame. And that's how the journey kind of starts. And then the journey keeps going. It endures on this journey. And not just to endure for heaven or a life to come after death, but endures because of joy. It endures because we don't just white-knuckle it to white-knuckle it more. We don't just suffer to suffer more. No, we endure because we believe if the journey started with hope, it keeps us going in joy, it keeps us going in grace. And that was the sort of last week we talked about this sort of courage of grace, if you will, to look at our real life. In our real life, of course, we have joys. In our real life, of course, we have hope. But in our real life, we also have a lot of fears. We have a lot of anxieties. We have a lot of doubts. Frankly, we have a lot of pain and suffering in our everyday lives. And grace gives us the courage to look at that suffering and say, some of that suffering we'll never understand. We'll never understand. It's unknown. We just got to give it up. Got to give it over to God. We got to do something with it because we're never going to understand why it has found us. But some of that challenge, some of that pain, some of that suffering actually formed our character and turned into a form of discipline. Not in this sort of punishment way, but in this sort of teaching, educational sort of way. We didn't look for that pain. We didn't look for that challenge. We didn't look for that anxiety or worry, but we ended up looking back on it. Grace has actually taught us that, wow, it actually did it did form us, formed our character, formed our morals, ethics, values, whatever it did, but it formed who we are in some really important ways. And just some of that pain, that discipline kind of pain, we look back on and go, it stunk going through, but I'm glad I went through it. But not all. So where does that leave us on this journey of faith? Well, last 3 weeks, I've been really deconstructing a lot of internal things, stuff that goes on really inside of here, up here, right? But you see, faith, as you all know, isn't an intellectual exercise. No. Faith is not an intellectual exercise in its primary form by any stretch of the imagination. Faith isn't even primarily an emotional exercise where we sense what's going on in our hearts and our minds. No, faith in its primary form, and I think Hebrews 13 really backs this up, is a practical exercise. Everything about faith is practical. while it can be internal, 100%, while it can work on the emotions or the mind, the education or the spirit inside of us, its main goal is to be put into practice. This is why Jesus says way back in Matthew, those that hear my words and put them into practice are my disciples. And then we got also Hebrews 13 today said, let brotherly love continue. Everything that is come down through the book of Hebrews, everything that the author has intended about the way of faith, how we do faith, ultimately comes down to let brotherly love, let sisterly love, let the love for other human beings continue. And it talks about praying for people in prison like you're in prison. Praying for people who are mistreated like their bodies mean just as much as your bodies. Go ahead and read through Hebrews 13, 1 through 17. It's all about what faith does in practice. And it sort of culminates in verse 16, verse 17, just basically saying, just don't stop doing good. Don't stop doing good. Whatever you do in your faith journey, no matter how you think about your faith journey, no matter what you processing in your faith journey, don't stop doing good. And in so many ways, guys, I have to admit, when I go through the individual part or the internal part of faith, whether that's listening to a sermon or a podcast, whether that's journaling or reading a devotion, reading a book, all those internal individual things, I don't always get the sense when I come out of those of like, I can't wait to go do good for other people. I can't wait to pray for those who are in prison like I'm in prison. I can't wait to go and pray for those who are being mistreated in the world because their body is just as important as mine. I can't wait to go share brotherly and sisterly love. It's funny, right? You think you'd go into the Word, you'd go into all this complex internal stuff and come out and be like, yes, let's go love on some people. Let's go do justice for some people. Let's go pray for some people. Let's go it may work like that in seasons, but so many times I come out of those things and I'm like, whoo, man, now I'm charged for what? To help myself through the day. And that's just another internal exercise. And don't hear me wrong, self-care is so important. I'm not getting down on self-care. I'm not getting down on how hard it is to get through the day some days. But I'm telling you right now, what faith tells us at the end of the day, once we've done our journals and read our blogs or listened to our podcasts and our sermons or done devotions or whatever, it ultimately should tell us always, go do good for others. Be the salt of the world. Be salt to other people. See, salt in its own flavor profile is pretty limited. Actually, if you had a mouthful of salt, you wouldn't probably like it. But you add that same mouthful of salt to an amazing recipe with all sorts of other ingredients, and that salt just makes those other spices soar and sing. And that, my friends, is what salt does. That's what salt does best, actually. And that's why Jesus says, you are the salt of the world. That's why Jesus says, and a lot of times, if you lose your saltiness, what are you going to do anymore? And what does that all mean? How does this have to do with practice and faith? It has to do with when you are called by hope, when you are sent forth in joy and courage that comes out of grace, then have the peace, then hold on to the peace that you can do what you're called to do. And that's to let brotherly love continue. That's to pray for prisoners like you are in prison. That is to pray for those that are mistreated like their body is as important as your body. And that's crazy and beautiful. And do our devotion times, do our journal times, do our podcast times, do our sermons really lift that up? Or does our podcast, sermons, devotion, journal time just send us back inside? Can't send us back inside. It can, it does, but the journey of faith, the peace that surpasses all understanding, says don't go back eternal. Go do what the faith is calling you to do. Go be the salt of the world. Go lift up other people, other flavors. Go share the love that has been shared with you. And that's peace. And that's a peace that surpasses all understanding that I can actually do it. Because I don't think I can. Because I started like I couldn't, right? I started emptied before God. I started empty before Christ. I started empty at the cross, however you want to say it. I started empty and said, I can't even help myself, let alone somebody else. And yet through that process, if you listen to those podcasts, if you listen to those sermons, if you do the journals, if you do the devotions, if you go on that journey of faith and really do some of the hard internal work, it should ultimately lead you externally. And if it doesn't, review your process. If it doesn't ultimately lead you back to let's continue in brotherly love, pray for people in prisons like I'm in prison, pray for people being mistreated because their body is as important as my body, and make sure that doing good doesn't cease. If it doesn't lead to that, if it leads to some other internal experience or not any of that at all in practice, then review your process. Review your journey of faith. Is it really doing what you want it to do? Is it, more importantly, is it doing what God wants it to do? Because so many times, and I am chief on this, guys, I really am. So many times I'm so happy that I had a refreshing moment in one of those things, podcast, sermon, reading a book, doing devotions, doing a journal. I'm just so happy that I had my refreshing moment that I forget about anybody else. And yet, Hebrews 13 is clear. No. That's not how faith is going to work here. Yes, self-care is important, 100%. Yes, it's important to review hope, review joy, review the faith journey, and being reminded that we can endure, that we go on this journey in courage of grace. 100% all of that. But if it doesn't ultimately lead us to serving and loving others, we need to review our process. And that's what Hebrews 13 is saying. Let's keep doing this. In the initial joy of faith, maybe we did it without even thinking about it. But maybe after a year, maybe after 2 years, maybe after 5 years, maybe after 20 years, you did it and you got tired. I'm telling you, it's easy. It's easy. It happens overnight before you know it. That faith just becomes an intellectual exercise, an emotional thing that you do, emotional hobby, a mental exercise you keep. But it has very little practice. And Hebrews 13, as well as Jesus, is reminding us, faith is not a primary intellectual exercise. It is a practical reality. It should hit at every single one of our practices. And if it doesn't, review your process. So my friends, this is where I'm going to end on this Hebrews 13 journey. But really, it's just the beginning. That as we all practice our faith, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be exactly like we want it to be, and that's okay. Continue to practice your faith. Continue to live out what you deeply believe in all the things that we say and we do in this life. And keep going on the journey. Keep practicing what God has given to you, a gift of faith, hope, joy, grace, and love. And keep going. No matter how hard it is, no matter how easy it is, keep going. Keep practicing that faith and knowing that you never do it alone, that God is with you, but the church, the body of believers, is with you as well. Amen. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us here on the Common Communion. So appreciate you. Next week, we're going to start looking at some parables from the Gospel of Luke. So it should be interesting to look at some parables with y'all. So I love story form. So it might be a little bit longer videos just so we can get the stories out there. But for now, my friends, be safe, but also be bold. Live out that faith and just see what God does with it. All right, until next time, my name's Jonathan Brandenburg, and I'll see you next time on the Common Communion. All right, bye, my friends.